Good evening. This is Knowledge Time. Welcome, alchemists. Today I'll be reading from the book The Laws of Human Nature by Robert Greene. Currently, I am in chapter 11 Know Your Limits, the Law of Grandiosity. We humans have a deep need to think highly of ourselves. If that opinion of our goodness, greatness, and brilliance diverges enough from reality, we become grandiose. We imagine our superiority. Often, a small measure of success will elevate our natural grandiosity to even more dangerous levels. Our high self opinion has now been confirmed by events. We forget the role that luck may have played in the success or the contributions of others. We imagine we have the golden touch. Losing contact with reality, we make irrational decisions. That is why our success does not often does not last. Look for the signs of elevated grandiosity in yourself and in others, overbearing certainty in the positive outcome of your plans, excessive touchiness if criticized, a disdain for any form of authority. Counteract the pull of grandiosity by maintaining a realistic assessment of yourself and your limits. Tie any feelings of greatness to your work, your achievements, and your contributions to society. Part 1. The Success Delusion. By the summer of 1984, Michael Eisner, born 1942, president of Paramount Pictures, could no longer ignore the relentlessness that had been plaguing him for months. He was impatient to move on to a bigger stage and shape the foundations of Hollywood. This restlessness had been the story of his life. He had begun his career at ABC and never settling too comfortably within one department. After 9 years of various promotions, he had risen to the position of head of primetime programming. But television began to seem small and constricting to him. He needed a larger, grandier stage. In 1976, Barry Diller, a former boss at ABC and now the chairman of Paramount Pictures, offered him the job of heading Paramount's film studio, and he jumped at the chance. Paramount had been long in the doldrums, but working with Diller, Eisner transformed it into the hottest studio in Hollywood, with a string of remarkably successful films: Saturday Night Fever, Grease, Flashdance, and Terms of Endearment. Although Diller certainly played a part in this turnaround, Eisner saw himself as the driving force behind the studio's success. After all, he had invented a surefire formula for creating profitable films. The formula depended on keeping costs down, and an obsession of his. To do so, a film had to begin with a great concept, one that was original, easy to summarize, and dramatic. Executives would hire the most expensive writers, directors, and actors for a film, but if the underlying concept was weak, all the money in the world would be wasted. Films with a strong concept, however, would market themselves. A studio could churn these relatively inexpensive films out in volume, and even if they were only moderate hits, they would ensure a steady flow of income. This thinking went against the grain of the blockbuster mentality of the late 1970s, but who would argue with the undeniable profits Eisner had generated for Paramount? Eisner immortalized this formula in a memo that soon spread around Hollywood and became gospel. But after so many years of sharing the limelight with Diller at Paramount, trying to please corporate CEOs and pushing back against marketing directors and finance people, Eisner had enough. If only he had if only he could run his own studio unfettered. With the formula he had created and with his relentless ambition, he could forge the greatest and most profitable entertainment empire in the world. He was tired of other people piggybacking on his ideas and success, operating on top and alone. he could control the show and take all the credit. As Eisner contemplated this next critical move in his career that summer of '84, he finally settled upon the perfect target for his ambition, the Walt Disney Company. At first glance, this would seem a puzzling choice. Since the death of Walt Disney in 1966, the Walt Disney Film Studio seemed frozen in time, getting weirder with each passing year. The place operated more like a stoogy men's club. Many executives stopped working after lunch and spent their afternoons in card games or would lounge about in the steam room on site. Hardly anyone was ever fired. The studio produced one animated film about every 4 years, and in 1983 produced a meager three live action films. They had not had a single hit film since The Love Bug in 1968. Remember that. The Disney lot in Burbank almost seemed like a ghost town. The actor Hanks, who worked on the lot in 1983, described it as a Greyhound bus station in the 1950s. Given, given its dilapidated condition, however, this would be the perfect place for Eisner to work his magic. The studio and the corporation could only move up. Its board members were desperate to turn it around and avoid a hostile takeover. Eisner, who Eisner could dictate the terms of his leadership position, presenting himself to Roy Disney, Walt's nephew and the largest shareholder of Disney stock, as the company's savior. He laid out a detailed and inspiring plan for a dramatic turnaround, greater than Paramount's, and Roy was won over. With Roy's blessing, the board approved the choice, and in September 1984, Eisner was named chairman and CEO of the Walt Disney Company. Frank Wells, the former head of Warner Brothers, was named president and chief operating officer. Wells would focus on the business side. It all matters. Eisner was the boss. Wells was there to help and serve him. Eisner wasted no time. He embarked on a major restructuring of the company, which led to the department of over 1,000 employees. He started filling the executive ranks with Paramount people, most notably Jeffrey Katzenberg, born 1950, who had worked at Eisner's right hand man at Paramount and was now named chairman of Walt Disney Studios. Katzenberg could be abrasive and downright rude, but no one in Hollywood was more efficient or worked harder. He simply got things done. Within months, Disney began to churn out a remarkable series of hits, adhering to Eisner's formula. 15 of its first 17 films, such as Down and Out in Beverly Hills and Who Framed Roger Rabbit, generated profits, a run of success almost unheard of for any studio in Hollywood. One day, as Eisner explored the Burbank lot with Wells, they entered the Disney library and discovered hundreds of cartoons from the golden era that had never been shown. There on endless shelves were stored all of the great Disney classic animated hits. Eisner's eyes lit up at the sight of this treasure. We could reissue all of these cartoons and animated films on video. The home video market was in the midst of exploding, and it would be pure profit. Based on these cartoons, the company could create stores to market the various Disney characters. Disney was a virtual goldmine waiting to be exploited, and Eisner would make the most of this. Soon the stores opened. The video sold like crazy. The film hits kept pumping profit into the company, and Disney's stock price soared. It had replaced Paramount as the hottest film studio in town. Wanting to cultivate a more public presence, Eisner decided to revive the wonderful world of Disney, an hour-long television show from the 50s and 60s hosted by Walt Disney himself. This time, Eisner would be the host. He was not a natural in front of the camera, but he felt audience would grow to like him. He could be comforting to children, like Walt himself. In fact, he began to feel the two of them were somehow magically connected, as if he were more than just the head of the corporation, but rather the natural son and successor to Walt Disney himself. Despite all his success, however, the old restlessness returned. He needed a new venture, a bigger challenge, and soon he found it. The Walt Disney Company had plans to create a new theme park in Europe. The last one to open, Tokyo Disneyland in 1983, had been a success. Those in charge of theme parks had settled upon two potential sites for the new Disneyland, one near Barcelona, Spain, the other near Paris. Although the Barcelona site made more economic sense since the weather there was much better, Eisner chose the French site. This was going to be more than a theme park. This was going to be a cultural statement. He would hire the best architects in the world, unlike the usual fiberglass castles at the other theme parks at Euro Disney, as it came to be known. The castles would be built out of pink stones and feature handcrafted stained glass windows with scenes from various fairy tales. It would be a place even snobby French elites would be excited to visit. Eisner loved architecture, and here he could be a modern day Medici. As the years went by, the cost of Euro Disney mounted. Letting go of his unusual obsession with the bottom line, Eisner felt that he built it right. The crowds would come, and the park would eventually pay for itself. But when it finally opened as planned in 1992, it quickly became clear that Eisner had not understood French tastes and vacation habits. The French were not so willing to wait in line for rides, particularly in bad weather. As in the other theme parks, no beer or wine was served on the premises, and that seemed like sacrilege to the French. The hotel rooms were too expensive for a family to stay there more than a night. And despite all the attention to detail, the pink stone castles still looked like kitschy versions of the originals. Attendance was only half of what Eisner had anticipated. The debts Disney had incurred in the construction had ballooned, and the money coming in from visitors could not even service the interest on them. It was shaping up to be a disaster, the first ever in his glorious career. As he finally came to terms with this reality, he decided that Frank Wells was to blame. Uh-oh. It was his job to oversee the financial health of the project, and he had failed. Whereas before, Eisner had only been the best things to say about their working relationship. Now he often complained about his second in command and contemplated firing him. In the middle of this growing debacle, Eisner felt a new threat on the horizon: Jeffrey Katzenberg. He had once referred to Katzenberg as his golden retriever, so loyal and hardworking. It was Katzenberg who had overseen the string of early hits for the studio, including the biggest hit of all, Beauty and the Beast, the film that had initiated the renaissance of Disney's animation department. But something about Katzenberg was making him increasingly nervous. Perhaps it was the memo that Katzenberg had written in 1999, in which he dissected the string of flops Disney had recently produced in live action. Since 1984, we have slowly drifted away from our original vision of how to run a business, he wrote. Katzenberg criticized the studio's decision to go for bigger budget films such as Dick Tracy trying to make event movies. Disney had fallen for the blockbuster mentality and had lost its soul in the process. Oh wow, that's interesting. The memo had Eisner uncomfortable. Dick Tracy was Eisner's own pet project. Was Katzenberg indirectly criticizing his boss? When he thought about it, it seemed like this was a clear imitation of his own infamous memo at Paramount, in which he had advocated for less expensive, high-concept films. Now it occurred to him that Katzenberg saw himself as the next Eisner. Maybe he was angling to take Eisner's job, to subtly undermine his authority. This began to eat away at him. Why was Katzenberg now cutting him out of the story meetings? The animation department soon became the primary generator of profit for the studio, with new hits such as Aladdin and now The Lion King, which had been Katzenberg baby. He had come up with the story idea and developed it from start to finish. Wow. Magazine articles now began to feature Katzenberg as was if he were the creative genius behind Disney's resurgence in the genre. What about Roy Disney, the vice chairman of animation? What about Eisner himself, who was in charge of everything? To Eisner, Katzenberg was now playing the media, building himself up. An executive had reported to Eisner that Katzenberg was going around saying, "I'm the Walt Disney of today." Suspicion soon turned into hatred. Eisner could not stand to be around him. Then in March of 1994, Frank Wells was killed in a helicopter accident while on a skiing trip. To reassure shareholders in Wall Street, Eisner soon announced that he would take over Wells' position as president. But suddenly here was Katzenberg pestering him with phone calls and memos reminding Eisner that he had promised him the president's job if Wells ever left the company. How insensitive. How insensitive. So soon after the tragedy, he stopped returning Katzenberg's phone calls. Finally, in August 1994, Eisner fired Jeffrey Katzenberg, shocking almost everyone in Hollywood. He had fired the most successful studio executive in town. The Lion King had become one of the most profitable films in Hollywood history. It was Katzenberg who was behind Disney's acquisition of Miramax, considered a great coup with the ensuing success of Pulp Fiction. It seemed like madness on his part, but Eisner did not care. Finally freed of Katzenberg's shadow, he could relax and now take Disney to the next level on his own and with no more distractions. To prove he had not lost his touch, he soon dazzled the entertainment world by engineering Disney's purchase of ABC. The sheer audacity of this coup once again made him the center of attention. Now he was forging an entertainment empire beyond what anyone had ever attempted or imagined. This move, however, created a problem for him. The company had virtually doubled in size. It was too complex, too big for one man. Only a year later, he had undergone open heart surgery, and he could not handle the added stress. He needed another Frank Wells, and his thoughts soon turned to his old friend Michael O. Vitas, one of the founders and head of creative artist agencies. Ovitas was the greatest dealmaker in Hollywood history, perhaps the most powerful man in town. Together they could dominate the field. Many within the business warned him against his hire. Ovitas was not like Frank Wells. He was not a finance guy or a master of detail, as Ovitas himself could have admitted. Eisner ignored such advice. People were being too conventional in their thinking. He decided to lure Ovitas away from CAA with a very lucrative package and offer him the title of president. He assured Ovitas in several discussions that although Ovitas would be second in command, they would eventually run the company as co-leaders. In a phone call, Ovitas finally agreed to all of the terms, but the moment Eisner hung up, he realized he had made the biggest mistake of his life. What had he been thinking? They might have been the closest of friends, but how would two such larger-than-life men ever be able to work together? Ovitas was power-hungry. This would be the Katzenberg problem times two. It was too late, however. He had gotten the board's approval for the hire. His own reputation, his decision-making process as a CEO was at stake. He could have to make it work. He quickly decided upon a strategy. He would narrow Ovitas' responsibilities, keep a tight leash on him, and make him prove himself as president. By doing so, Ovitas could learn Eisner's trust and get more power. From day one, Eisner wanted to signal to Ovitis who was boss. Instead of moving him into Frank Wells' old office on the sixth floor at Disney headquarters next to Eisner's, Eisner put him in a rather unimpressive office on the fifth floor. Ovitis liked to spread money around with gifts and lavish parties to charm people. Eisner had his team monitor every penny that Ovitis spent on such things and watch his every move. Was Ovitis contacting other executives behind Eisner's back? He, he would not nurture another Katzenberg at his breast. Soon the following dynamic developed. Ovitis would approach him with some potential deal, and Eisner would not discourage him from exploring it. But once it came time to agree to the deal, Eisner would give a firm no. Slowly, word spread through the industry that Ovitis had lost his touch and could no longer close a deal. Ovitis began to panic. He wanted desperately to prove he had been worthy of the choice. He offered to move to New York to help manage ABC, since the merger of the two companies was not working out so smoothly. But Eisner said no. He told his lieutenants to keep their distance from Ovitis. He was not a man to be trusted. He was the son of a liquor salesman in the San Fernando Valley, and like his father, Ovitis was just a smooth salesman. He was addicted to attention from the media. Within the company, Ovitis had become completely isolated. As the months dragged on in this saga, Ovitis could see what was happening, and he complained bitterly to Eisner. He had felt his agency for Disney. He had staked his reputation on what he would do as president, and Eisner was destroying his reputation. Nobody respected him any longer in the business. Eisner's treatment of Ovitis was downright sadistic. In Eisner's mind, however, Ovitis had failed the test he had laid out. He had not proven himself to be patient. He was no Frank Wells. In December of 1996, after a mere 14 months on the job, Ovitis was fired, taking with him an enormous severance package. It was a dizzying and rapid fall from grace. Finally, liberated from his great mistake, Eisner began to consolidate power within the company. ABC was not doing so well. He could have to intervene and take some control. He began to attend programming meetings. He talked of his own golden days at ABC and of the great shows he had created there, such as Lavini and Shirley and Happy Days. ABC needed to go back to that earlier philosophy and create high-concept shows for the family. As the internet began to take off, Eisner had to get involved in a big way. He nixed the purchase of Yahoo, pushed by his executives. Instead, Disney would start his own internet portal called Go. Over the years, he had learned the lesson. It was always best to design and run your own show. Disney would dominate the internet. He had proven himself a turnaround genius twice before, and with Disney now in a slump, he would do it a third time. Soon, however, a wave of disasters hit the corporation, one after another. After being fired, Katzenberg had sued Disney for the bonus, based on performance. He was due under his contract. When he had been president, Ovitis had tried to settle the suit before it went to court and had gotten Katzenberg to agree to $90 million. But at the last minute, Eisner had nixed this, certain he did not owe Katzenberg anything. In 2001, the judge ruled in Katzenberg's favor, and they had to settle for a whopping $280 million. Disney had poured vast resources into the creation of Go, and it was a terrible flop that had to be shut down. The costs from Euro Disney were still bleeding the company. Disney had a partnership with Pixar, and together they had produced such hits such as Toy Story. But now the CEO of Pixar, Steve Jobs, made it clear he would never work with Disney again, deeply resenting Eisner's micromanaging. ABC was underperforming. Most of the movies Disney produced were not just flops, but expensive flops, culminating in the biggest one of all, Pearl Harbor, which opened in May of 2001. Suddenly, it seemed that Roy Disney had lost faith in Eisner. The stock price was plummeting. He told Eisner it would be best for him to resign. What ingratitude! What hubris! He, Eisner, was the man who had single-handedly brought the company back from the dead. He had saved Roy from disaster and made him a fortune. Roy, who had been considered Walt's idiot nephew and now in Eisner's darkest hour, Roy was going to betray him. Eisner had never felt more enraged. He quickly struck back, forcing Roy to resign from the board. This only seemed to embolden Roy. He organized a shareholder revolt known as Save Disney, and in March of 2004, the shareholders voted a stinging rebuke of Eisner's leadership. Soon the board Soon the board decided to strip Eisner of his position as chairman of the board. The empire he had forged was falling apart. In September of 2005, with hardly any ally to lean on and feeling alone and betrayed, Eisner officially resigned from Disney. How had it all unraveled so quickly? They they would come to miss him, he told friends, and he meant all of Hollywood. There would never be another like him. Whew. Okay, interpretation. We can say that at a certain point in his career, Michael Eisner succumbed to a form of delusion when it came to power. His thinking so divorced from reality that he made business decisions with disastrous consequences. Let us follow the progress of this particular form of delusion as it emerged and took over his mind. At the beginning of his career at ABC, young Eisner had a solid grasp on reality. He was fiercely practical. He understood and exploited to the maximum his strengths, his ambitions, and competitive nature. His intense work ethic, his keen sense for the entertainment taste of the average American. Eisner had a quick mind and the ability to encourage others to think creatively. Leaning on these strengths, he rose quickly up the ladder. He possessed a high degree of confidence in his talents, and the series of promotions he received at ABC confirmed his self-opinion. He could afford to be a little cocky because he had learned a lot on the job and his skills as a programmer had improved immensely. He was on a fast track toward the top, which he reached at the age of 34 by being named head of primetime programming at ABC. As a person of high ambition, he soon felt that the world of television was somewhat constricting. There were limits to the kinds of entertainment he could program. The film world offered something looser, greater, and more glamorous. It was natural then for him to accept the position at Paramount. But at Paramount, something occurred that began the subtle process of the unbalancing of his mind. Because the stage was bigger and he was the head of the studio, he began to receive attention from the media and the public. He was featured on the cover of magazines as the hottest film executive in Hollywood. This was quantitatively different from the attention and satisfaction that had come from the promotions at ABC. Now he had millions of people admiring him. How could their opinions be wrong? To them, he was a genius, a new kind of hero altering the landscape of the studio system. This was intoxicating. It inevitably elevated his estimation of his skills, but it came with a great danger. The success that Eisner had had at Paramount was not completely of his own doing. When he had arrived at the studio, several films were already in pre-production, including Saturday Night Fever, which would spark the turnaround. Barry Diller was a perfect foil to Eisner. He would argue with him endlessly about his ideas, forcing Eisner to sharpen them. But puffed but puffed at but puffed up by the attention he was receiving. Eisner had to imagine that he deserved the accolades he received strictly for his own efforts, and so naturally he subtracted from his success the elements of good timing, and the contribution of others. Now his mind was subtly divorcing itself from reality. Instead of vigorously focusing on the audience and how to entertain people, he started to increasingly focus on himself, believing in the myth of his greatness as promulgated by others. He imagined he had the golden touch. I'm on page. Wow, this is page 300. Just had to put that in there. Put a tab. Page 300. I've read 300 pages. Yes. At Disney, the pattern repeated and grew more intense. He basked in the glow of his amazing success there, quickly forgetting the incredible good luck he had in inheriting the Disney library at the time of the explosion of home video and family entertainment. He discounted the critical role that Wells had played in balancing him out. With the sense of grandeur growing, he faced a dilemma. He had become addicted to the attention that came from creating a splash, doing something big. He could not content himself with simple success and rising profits. He had to add to the myth to keep it alive. Euro Disney would be the answer. He would show the world he was not a corporate executive but rather a Renaissance man. In building the park, he refused to listen to experienced advisors who recommended that Barcelona site and advocated a modest theme park to keep the cost down. He did not pay attention to French culture but directly everything from Burbank. He operated under the belief that his skills as the head of a film studio could be transferred to theme parks and architecture. He was certainly overestimating his creative powers, and now his business decisions revealed a large enough detachment from reality to qualify as delusional. Once this mental imbalance takes hold, it can it can only get worse, because to come back down to earth is to admit that one's earlier high self-opinion was wrong, and the human animal will almost never admit it. Instead, the tendency is to blame others for every failure or setback. In the grips now of his delusion, he made his most serious mistake of all: the firing of Jeffrey Katzenberg. The Disney system depended on a steady flow of new animated hits, which fed the stores and theme parks with new characters, merchandise, rides, and avenues for publicity. Katzenberg clearly had developed the knack for creating such hits, exemplified by the unprecedented success of The Lion King. Firing him put the entire assembly line at risk. Who would take over? Certainly not Roy Disney or Eisner himself. Furthermore, he had to know that Katzenberg would take his skills elsewhere, which he did when he co-founded a new studio, DreamWorks. There he churned out more animated hits. The new studio drove up the price for skilled animators, vastly increasing the cost of producing an animated film and threatening Disney's entire profit system. But instead of a firm grip on this reality, Eisner was more focused on the competition for attention. Katzenberg's rise threatened his elevated self-opinion, and he had to sacrifice profit and practicality to soothe his ego. The downward spiral had begun. The acquisition of ABC, under the belief that bigger is better, revealed his growing detachment from reality. Television was a dying business model in the age of new media. It was not a realistic business decision, but a play for publicity. He had created an entertainment behemoth, a blob without any clear identity. The hiring and firing of Ritas revealed an even greater level of delusion. People had become mere instruments for Eisner to use. Ritas was considered the most fearful and powerful man in Hollywood. Perhaps Eisner was unconsciously driven by the desire to humiliate Ritas. If he had the power to make Ritas beg for crumbs, he must be the most powerful man in Hollywood. Soon, all of the problems that stem from his delusional thought process began to cascade. A continually rising cost of Euro Disney, the Katzenberg bonus, the lack of hits in both film division, the continual drain on resources from ABC, the Ovitas severance package. The board members could no longer ignore the following stock price. The firing of Katzenberg and Ovitas made Eisner the most hated man in Hollywood, and as his fortunes fell, all of his enemies came out of the woodwork to hasten his destruction. His fall from power was fast and spectacular. Wow. Understand. Wow, that was I didn't know that story. Understand, the story of Michael Eisner is much closer to you than you think. His fate could easily be yours, albeit most likely on a smaller scale. The reason is simple. We humans possess a weakness that is latent in us all and will push us into the delusional process without our ever being aware of the dynamic. The weakness stems from our natural tendency to overestimate our skills. We normally have a self-opinion that is somewhat elevated in relation to reality. We have a deep need to feel ourselves superior to others in something: intelligence, beauty, charm, popularity, or saintliness. This can be a positive. A degree of confidence impels us to take on challenges, to push past our supposed limits, and to learn in the process. But once we experience success on any level, increased attention from an individual or group, a promotion, funding for a project, that confidence will tend to rise too quickly, and there will be an ever-growing discrepancy between our self-opinion and reality. Any success that we have in life inevitably depends on some good luck, timing, the contribution of others, the teachers who helped us along the way, the whims of the public in need of something new. Our tendency is to forget all of this and imagine that any success stems from our superior self. We begin to assume we can handle new challenges well before we are ready. After all, people have confirmed our greatness with their attention, and we want to keep it coming. We imagine we have the golden touch and that we can now magically transfer our skills to some other medium or field. Without realizing it, we become more attuned to our ego and our fantasies than to the people we work for and our audience. We grow distant from those who are helping us, seeing them as tools to be used. And with any failures that occur, we need to blame others. Success has an irresistible pull to it that tends to cloud our minds. Your task is the following. After any kind of success, analyze the components. See the element of luck that is inevitably there, as well as the role that other people, including mentors, played in your good fortune. This will neutralize the tendency to inflate your powers. Remind yourself that with success comes complacency, as attention becomes more important than the work and old strategies are repeated. With success, you must raise your vigilance. Wipe the slate clean with each new project starting from zero. I'm learning that. Try to pay less attention to the applause as it grows louder. See the limits to what you can accomplish and embrace them, working with what you have. Don't believe bigger is better. Consolidating and concentrating your forces is often the wiser choice. Be wary of offending with your growing sense of superiority. You will need your allies. Compensate for the drug-like effect of success by keeping your feet planted firmly on the ground. The power you will build up in this slow and organic way will be more real and lasting. Remember, the gods are merciless with those who fly too high on the wings of grandiosity, and they will make you pay the price. Quote, existing alone had never been enough for him. He had always wanted more. Perhaps it was only from the forces of his desires that he had regarded himself as a man to whom more was permitted than to others. By Fyodor Dostoyevsky, Crime and Punishment. Okay, pretty much in conclusion, from what I read, basically, wow, that I did not know that story about. I'm gonna have to look further into it, but The creator from DreamWorks came out of that too. Um, Pretty much what I get from reading it was Eisner was pretty much. I don't know if he was just alone, like if he didn't have a wife or kids or what. I'm thinking like he was just a single guy and that was his life. Like he didn't have a family, so I don't know the other side of it, but then I was like, okay, if I did put myself in it, I just know now, like just reading the story, pretty much, if I ever get into that mode, is I just to humble myself, pretty much take a step back. He's just probably too glorified. Didn't have his parents. That's pretty much what I get from it, because I didn't have my parents either, and I could feel that vibe, because you don't have nothing else really. All your energy's going into that, so. But my thing is, once you get everything, you still got to know how to. Well, it was. I mean, he was just probably over. He started getting addicted to that power. That's what I saw. Outro. Subscribe to the channel. Comment any questions you have. Like if the information was inspiring for you, and share this knowledge with other alchemists. Also, follow me on Instagram for more progressive knowledge. My Instagram is max_Bugatti_8008. I'm about family first. I'm a global stock investor. I'm a filmmaker. I'm an aerospace botanist. I have a masculine confidence buildings course, and currently I'm out here in Cali, Colombia. While you're slaying dragons, I'll be taming them.